I grew up in a small town in Nebraska, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the biggest event of the year was the county fair. My name's Ethan, and back in 2019, I was 28, living in a modest house on the edge of town with my girlfriend Sarah. We'd been together for 3 years, and that summer, we decided to throw a barbecue to celebrate her promotion at work. It was supposed to be a fun day. Friends, food, music, the works. I volunteered to handle the shopping, which meant a trip to the local butcher shop, a small place called Carver's Meats that had been around since my grandpa's days. The owner, Mr. Carver, was a quiet guy, always wearing a stained apron, but he was friendly enough, and his cuts were the best in town. I had no reason to think twice about him. That morning, I had no idea how wrong I'd been about everything. The day started out perfectly. The sun was shining, a warm breeze rustling through the cornfields, and I was in a good mood as I drove to Carver's Meats. The shop was a small brick building on the outskirts of town, its faded sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of iron and sawdust. Mr. Carver was behind the counter, his broad frame hunched over a slab of beef, a cleaver in his hand. He looked up when I walked in, his small, watery eyes meeting mine through his thick glasses. "Morning, Ethan," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "What can I get you?" I told him about the barbecue, and he nodded, suggesting some cuts of lamb and pork for the grill. He even threw in a few sausages for free, saying they were a new recipe he'd been working on. I thanked him, paid, and left, the bag of meat heavy in my hands as I headed home to start prepping. The barbecue was a hit. By mid-afternoon, our backyard was full of friends laughing, music playing, and the smell of grilled meat wafting through the air. Sarah was glowing, happier than I'd seen her in months, and I felt proud of how everything was coming together. But as the evening rolled around, I realized we were running low on lamb. Our guests were hungrier than I'd expected. Sarah suggested I run back to Carver's Meats to grab more. I checked the time. It was just past 7 p.m., and the shop closed at 8, so I figured I had plenty of time. I kissed her on the forehead, grabbed my keys, and headed out, the sky now streaked with the deep oranges and purples of dusk. When I got to Carver's Meats, the parking lot was empty, and the shop looked darker than it had that morning, the windows reflecting the fading light like black mirrors. The open sign was still up, though, so I pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling faintly. The shop was eerily quiet, the hum of the coolers the only sound. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No answer. I stepped further inside, the air colder now, the smell of iron stronger, almost overpowering. The counter was empty, but there was a trail of something dark, blood I realized, leading toward the back, where a heavy steel door marked "Employees Only" stood slightly ajar. I should have left right then, but I needed that lamb, and I figured Mr. Carver was just in the back, maybe cleaning up. I called out again, louder this time, and pushed the door open. The smell hit me like a wall, raw, metallic, and something else, something rotten. The back room was a slaughterhouse, a cavernous space with concrete floors stained dark, hooks hanging from the ceiling, and a long metal table covered in tools, cleavers, saws, knives, all glistening with a thin sheen of blood. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds, casting jagged shadows across the room. I took a step inside, my sneakers squeaking on the wet floor, and that's when I heard it. A low, guttural grunt, like an animal coming from the far corner of the room. I froze, my heart pounding, as a figure stepped out from behind a row of hanging carcasses. It was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a stained butcher's apron, but its face was hidden behind a pig mask, the kind you'd see at a costume shop, with hollow black eyes and a grotesque, stitched snout. In its right hand, it held a massive cleaver, the blade dripping with something dark and viscous. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as the figure tilted its head, the mask's snout twitching slightly, like it was sniffing the air. "Mr. Carver," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took a step forward, the cleaver dragging across the floor with a slow, deliberate scrape that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge, and the figure was getting closer, its heavy boots thudding against the concrete. I could hear its breathing now, ragged and wet. I darted to the side, ducking behind a stack of crates, my hands shaking as I tried to think of a way out. The figure stopped, its head swiveling slowly, the pig mask scanning the room. Then it spoke, its voice low and distorted, muffled by the mask. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan." My blood ran cold. How did it know my name? I didn't have time to think. I heard the crates being shoved aside, the wood splintering as the figure charged toward me. I bolted for a side door I hadn't noticed before, my sneakers slipping on the blood-slick floor. The door led to a narrow hallway, the walls lined with rusted pipes, the air thick with the stench of decay. I could hear the figure behind me, its cleaver scraping against the walls, the sound growing louder, closer. I burst through another door and found myself outside, in a fenced-off lot behind the shop, surrounded by piles of discarded bones and rotting meat. The storm that had been brewing all day had arrived, rain pouring down in sheets, lightning illuminating the figure as it stepped out into the lot, the pig mask glistening in the rain. I ran, my lungs burning, until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as the figure closed in. I got the door open and peeled out of the parking lot, my tires screeching, the figure's silhouette shrinking in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until I got home, my hands still shaking as I locked the door behind me. Sarah was in the kitchen cleaning up, and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I told her what happened. I didn't have the lamb, but I was alive, and that was enough. The next day I went to the police, but when they searched Carver's meats, they found nothing. No blood, no slaughterhouse, no pig mask. The shop was pristine, like nothing had ever happened. Mr. Carver was there, behind the counter, his apron clean, his small, watery eyes meeting mine as he smiled. "Everything okay, Ethan?" he asked, his voice gruff but warm, just like it had been that morning. I froze, my stomach twisting as I realized the truth. The psychopath in the pig mask, the one who chased me through that nightmare of a slaughterhouse, it was him. Mr. Carver, the friendly shop owner I'd known my whole life, had been hiding a monster behind that smile all along. They found the tapes in a condemned slaughterhouse on the outskirts of town. No one knew how long they had been there, buried beneath decades of dust and dried blood. The place had been shut down in the early 90s after rumors of illegal butchering practices, rumors that never made it to court because the owners vanished overnight. No arrests, no explanations, just a boarded-up building rotting in silence. But those tapes, they told the truth. Detective Harris, a retired cop with a bad habit of revisiting old cases, was the one who got his hands on them first. He was warned not to go inside. Locals still swore the place was cursed. But Harris had seen enough in his time on the force to laugh at ghost stories. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, he forced his way in. The stench hit him first. Not just mold and decay, but something deeper, something wrong. It smelled like meat, raw and putrid, like a freezer left unplugged for years. The floor was slick with something black, and his boots stuck with every step. Flies swarmed the air, but there was no sound except his own breathing. Then he saw the room. Rows of rusted meat hooks dangled from the ceiling, swaying as if something unseen had just brushed past them. The cutting tables were still stained, their grooves deep with decades of slicing. But the worst part was the chair. It was bolted to the center of the room, leather straps curling like fingers where wrists and ankles had once been held. A crude microphone dangled from the ceiling above it, and a camera was mounted on the wall, aimed directly at the seat. Harris found the tapes inside an old metal cabinet. Dust-covered VHS cassettes, labeled only with dates. The last one read, November 14th, 1991. He took them home, ignoring the sick feeling curling in his gut. That night he poured himself a stiff drink, slid the first tape into an old player, and hit play. The screen flickered to life with grainy black and white footage. The camera was aimed at the chair. A man sat strapped in, naked except for an apron, his face covered by a burlap sack. He was trembling, mumbling something Harris couldn't make out. Then a voice crackled through the speakers. "Tell us your sins," the man sobbed. A figure stepped into frame. Tall, clad in a butcher's uniform, face hidden behind a grotesque pig mask. He held a long, glinting knife. "Tell us your sins and we will make it quick," the man screamed. Harris hit stop and ran to the bathroom, vomiting into the sink. But something inside him needed to know more. He forced himself to watch. One by one, the tapes revealed a horror beyond imagining. Different victims, different nights, all forced into that chair, all given the same choice: confess or suffer. Some pleaded, spilling secrets about cheating spouses, stolen money, dark urges. Those were given the mercy of a swift death. But the ones who refused, Harris watched them butchered alive, limbs sawed off like cattle, skin flayed and stretched across the walls like grotesque trophies. Some were gutted, their insides dragged out while they still screamed. The masked figures worked with precision, like seasoned butchers. And always after the deed was done, the tapes ended with the same chilling words: "Meat must not be wasted." Harris realized the truth in an instant. The rumors about the slaughterhouse weren't just true. They had never been about animals. His hands shook as he reached for the last tape, the one dated November 14th, 1991. He hesitated, knowing deep down that whatever was on it was worse than anything he had seen before. But he had to know. The footage started like the others: the chair, the microphone, the masked butcher. But this time, the victim wasn't strapped down. He was standing, staring at the camera, and Harris recognized him. It was the owner of the slaughterhouse. His own employees surrounded him, wearing those same pig masks, their aprons soaked in something dark. The owner's face was twisted in terror. He begged them, pleaded, "Please, we made a mistake. We took the wrong man. Please, don't do this." The tallest figure in the group raised a butcher's hook. "Meat must not be wasted." The screen cut to black. That was the last tape. There were no records of where the employees had gone after the slaughterhouse shut down. No bodies were ever found. Harris destroyed the tapes that night, but he knew it wasn't over, because when he looked out his window, he saw them. A row of pig-masked figures standing in the dark, staring up at his house, and one of them whispered, "Meat must not be wasted." In 1978, the old Meyer slaughterhouse was the lifeblood of the small town of Ashbrook. Everyone had a connection to it. Either they worked there, had family who did, or ate the meat it provided. But behind the blood-streaked walls, something darker festered. Arthur Greaves, the owner, ran the place with an iron fist. His workers were paid scraps, forced into grueling 16-hour shifts. Those who complained met accidents: a severed finger here, a crushed limb there. OSHA was bribed to look the other way, but the worst rumors surrounded the underground butchering room, the one only a handful of employees ever saw. The whispers started when a group of migrant workers went missing. Then a drifter, a vagrant. No one cared enough to investigate. People just stopped asking questions. And then, in the fall of '78, the Meyer slaughterhouse burned to the ground. The official report called it an accident, a faulty gas line ignited by a careless worker. But some of the older residents, those who still remembered, knew better. They knew about the man who had died in the fire, the man who never made it out. His name was Elias Carter. Present day, 2024. James Carter had never believed in ghosts. He had never believed in much of anything, really. Not after losing his father at the age of 5. His mother never spoke about what happened to Elias, only that he worked at the slaughterhouse and died in the fire. No details, no closure. But after she passed, James found the letter. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard, old and yellowed with time, written in his father's shaky scrawl, dated October 12th, 1978, the night before the fire. James, if you ever read this, I need you to know the truth. Myers isn't just a slaughterhouse, it's a graveyard. Arthur and his men, what they do down there. God help me, I can't keep quiet anymore. I have proof. I'm going to stop them, no matter what it takes. If I don't come back, know that I did it for you, for all of us. James didn't sleep that night. He had never cared about the past, but now it had its claws in him, dragging him backward. He needed to find what his father had seen. The ruins of Meyer Slaughterhouse. The building had been left to rot for decades, its charred remains barely holding together. James wasn't supposed to be here, but no one patrolled the place anymore. The town wanted to forget, but James couldn't. He found the underground entrance beneath a collapsed stairwell. It was real, the place his father had written about. He squeezed through the debris, flashlight flickering. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decay. The deeper he went, the worse it got. Then he saw them. Hooks, chains, bones, not animal bones. James gagged, stepping back, his boot hitting something solid. A rusted metal cabinet stood against the far wall, its door hanging open. Inside were reels of film, each labeled with a date. His father had been right. These were the missing people. James reached for one, his hands trembling. But before he could take it, something creaked behind him. A voice, low and rasping, spoke his name. James Carter. He spun around, flashlight shaking. The shadows shifted. Something was there. A figure, impossibly charred and blackened, stood just beyond the light. Its face was barely a face at all. Melted flesh, hollow eyes, teeth grinning through burned lips. James wanted to run, but he couldn't, because the thing in the dark took a step forward and whispered, "He's still alive." James's blood went cold. Arthur Greaves was still alive? The address wasn't hard to find. Arthur Greaves had escaped justice for decades, living in wealth, hidden away in a gated estate on the edge of town. He had never paid for what he had done. James arrived at midnight. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He broke in. Greaves was old now, frail and wheezing in his luxurious chair. He barely had time to react before James shoved the rusted film reels in front of him. "Watch!" Arthur's face paled as the projector flickered to life. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Victims strapped to metal tables, butchered like cattle. Greaves himself stood among the killers, laughing, carving, feasting. James had expected denials, screaming, begging, but Greaves just smirked. "You're just like your father. Think you can stop the inevitable?" His voice was cracked, ancient, but filled with something wrong. "Do you even know what we were feeding them?" James's stomach lurched. Arthur chuckled, a wet rattling sound. "Meat's meat, boy, and the town was always hungry." James raised the hammer, and that's when the lights went out. The air grew thick, suffocating. And then the sound came, a wet, shuffling scrape, as if something burned and broken was crawling toward them. Arthur's smirk vanished. He knew. The whisper came from the dark. "Meat must not be wasted," Arthur screamed. James watched, frozen, as the charred figure emerged. His father, or what was left of him. Elias Carter reached for Arthur with blackened, skeletal hands, dragging him down, deeper into the dark. Arthur's screams turned into wet gurgles, then silence. James didn't stay to watch. By the time he stumbled out of the house, the old man was gone. The next morning, Arthur Greaves was missing. No body, no trace. But James knew the truth. Justice had been served, and somewhere in the ashes of the past, his father finally rested. When I was 16 back in 2015, I lived in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where nothing ever happened, and kids had to make their own fun. My name's Tyler, and I was part of a tight-knit group of friends, 5 of us who'd known each other since elementary school. We were always daring each other to do stupid things, like sneaking into the old cemetery at midnight or climbing the water tower on the edge of town. That summer, we'd heard about an abandoned slaughterhouse a few miles out, a sprawling, decrepit building that had been shut down in the 90s after a fire killed half the workers. The place was a local legend, with stories of ghosts and strange noises, but we didn't believe in that stuff. We just wanted a thrill. So one night, we decided to play hide and seek there, thinking it'd be a fun challenge. I had no idea what I'd find in that place, or how it would change me forever. The story was a Friday night in July, the air warm and sticky as we piled into my friend Jake's beat-up pickup truck. The 5 of us, me, Jake, Mia, Lucas, and Emma, were buzzing with excitement, laughing and joking as we drove out to the slaughterhouse. The building loomed on the horizon, a hulking mass of rusted metal and broken windows, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had long since collapsed in places. We parked a quarter-mile away, not wanting to draw attention, and hiked the rest of the way, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air smelled of mildew and something sour, and the only sounds were the crickets and the occasional creak of the building settling in the wind. We climbed through a gap in the fence and made our way inside. The main entrance, a gaping maw of shattered glass and splintered wood. The interior was a labyrinth of concrete corridors and cavernous rooms, the walls stained with decades of grime and rust. Hooks hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft, and the floor was littered with debris, broken pipes, shattered bottles, and what looked like animal bones, though I told myself they were probably just props from some prank. We set the rules. One person would seek and the rest would hide, with a 10-minute time limit. Jake volunteered to seek first and we scattered, our laughter echoing through the empty space as we ran to find hiding spots. I found a spot in what must have been a storage room, a small windowless space with a rusted metal cabinet in the corner. I squeezed behind the cabinet, the cold metal pressing against my back, and turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere nearby and the occasional shout from my friends as Jake found them. I waited, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves, the darkness making every sound feel amplified. 5 minutes passed, then 7, and I started to relax, thinking I'd picked a good spot. That's when I heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor, coming from the hallway outside. I held my breath, thinking it was Jake trying to scare me, but the sound was too deliberate, too slow. I peeked out from behind the cabinet, my eyes straining in the dark, and that's when I saw it, a faint glow, like firelight, flickering at the end of the hallway. The thumping stopped, replaced by a wet, squelching sound, like meat being torn apart. I crept closer, my curiosity outweighing my fear, and peered around the corner. The hallway opened into a larger room, one I hadn't seen when we first came in. In the center of the room was a pile of animal carcasses, pigs, cows, maybe even a deer, stacked in a grotesque heap, their bodies glistening with fresh blood. A single lantern sat on the floor, casting a sickly orange glow across the scene, and standing over the pile was a figure, its back to me. It was tall, dressed in tattered overalls, its hands gloved and slick with blood. It was butchering one of the carcasses, its movements slow and methodical, a rusted cleaver slicing through flesh with a sickening crunch. The air was thick with the smell of blood and decay, and I gagged, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the sound. The figure froze, its head snapping up, and I ducked back into the hallway, my heart racing. I heard it stand, its boots squelching in the blood, and then a low, guttural hum, like a twisted lullaby, filled the air. I turned to run, but my flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor with a loud clang. The humming stopped, and I heard the figure's heavy footsteps coming toward me, the cleaver dragging across the concrete with a slow, deliberate scrape. I bolted down the hallway, my sneakers slipping on the grime, the sound of the figure's pursuit growing louder behind me. I found my friends near the entrance, their faces pale as they heard the footsteps too. We didn't wait to see what was coming. We ran, piling into Jake's truck and speeding away, the slaughterhouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. We didn't talk about what happened, not that night, not ever. But a week later, I found something in my backpack, something I hadn't put there. A small, rusted cleaver, its blade stained with dried blood, and a note tucked beneath it. The note read, "You saw me. Now I see you." I burned the note, threw the cleaver into the river, but it didn't matter. Every night since, I've had the same dream. I'm back in that slaughterhouse hiding behind the cabinet, but this time, the figure turns around, and its face is mine, smiling as it raises the cleaver to strike.